we all sit in boxes. We sleep in a box. We get in a box with wheels. We go into a box with wings. We get get over yourself, man.
We look into boxes of light and talk to other people in other boxes. Yeah, exactly.
All of them engineered to get us to do things.
Yeah.
And so how about instead of doing things in somebody else's box that they engineered to make you do stuff, you engineer your own dang box.
Welcome to the Invigor Medical Podcast, where we sit down with medical professionals and discuss a full spectrum of health-related subjects. It all starts in 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to the Invigor Medical Podcast. Today we have Dr. Trevor Kashey. Dr. Kashey is the founder of Trevor Kashey Nutrition. He received his Ph.D. in biochemistry and has put that knowledge to work over the last 15 years, helping people create lasting results in their lives. Dr. Kashey, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for welcoming me. So pleased to be here. How do you do today, my friend?
I'm doing very good. How are you doing?
Fantastic. Wonderful day. Wonderful day.
It's a great day.
To see a smiling face, by the way. So many people walk around. So even your sad face makes me smile. So thank you for that. Hard to buy that.
Yeah, man. Well, hey, I did a lot of research for the show, and I'm very interested to hear more about you and your story. I read your bio a little bit and kind of got into that a little bit. But can you explain to the audience here how you got into biochemistry, then how that actually led you to nutrition and to doing everything that you're doing currently?
Okay, I will tell you about the science related stuff first. Happened very young, super young. I think if I remember correctly, or what my mother remembers correctly, the Human Genome Project basically ended at like the year 2000. And so, and a lot of hype started happening around that time. Craig Ventnor, like all these people, like, I want to race the government and patent the genome, this whole civil arms race for genetic material, fun stuff happening. In any case, little dude, me, gets a hold of this, they made a glow-in-the-dark monkey. And I managed to sound out the little dude me recombinant deoxyribonucleic acid. It took me 5 minutes, I guess, to figure it out. Wow. And then it literally started there, I think. And then fast forward a little bit, you see little kids, especially little boys, they want to be X-Men for Halloween. Right. I want to be Wolverine. And you had me the comic book villain in the corner going, how did they get the metal into his bones? That guy, you talk to that guy. And so that sort of, started this whole deal of the biology thing happened on accident. Really, the glow in the dark monkey, just as a little kid, just whoa. Okay. And because they put, I think, blue fluorescent protein, they put jellyfish DNA in the monkey.
Right.
So you get that idea. That got me super interested. And now fast forward, I turned into the most annoying kid on planet Earth.
Ask a million questions. I've got two of those at home. One of them is talking.
Very good. If you punish that, I will personally come over and make your life miserable. Okay, so very good. And lucked out with some few mentors, got into collegiate level science courses, literature. That's very early on in life. So I got to start that very early. Got into cancer research relatively young. And that cancer research ended up transitioning into biophysics, where, for lack of a better term, I shot lasers at green sludge, and you go, what does it have to do with nutrition? And then you realize, well, we eat lots of green stuff, or at least some of us. True. And that, the green stuff has things in it good for us that also turn out to have use in plants. And so, or algae or heliobacteria or whatever you end up shooting green lasers at. And so that ended up in conjunction with my father coming back into my life, who, for lack of a better term, spent time in a different kind of cell than I studied. We have very little in common. And so, as the sort of kid he beat up, what can we do? We actually started lifting weights as a way to bond.
There you go.
And so that sort of intersected with exercise and strength training and biochemistry very fast. Very almost immediate, okay, I can do these things. I can do these things together. And it went very fast into the nutrition realm, spent time in nutraceuticals, and did relatively well in the sport that I competed at the amateur level. Had some reputation in that crowd, ended up working with some athletes there, And that ended up, frankly speaking, exploding into me working on the other side of the planet working as a physiologist for the 2016 Olympics at Rio de Janeiro.
Wow.
Worked with many hundreds of crazy from a bunch of different countries. Fantastic time, interesting stuff went down there. I'll just leave the story there unless you want to dive into it some other time. But I worked as a physiologist for many different countries, mainly based in Baku, Azerbaijan, where I spent a lot of the time, but worked I want to say Mongolians, Georgians, Turkish, Syrians.
The whole gambit.
Yes, lots of stands, because they all had this sort of training pack that they had. And that got me even gnarlier into the clinical side of nutrition, because I ended up going the route of doing my biochemistry doctoral degree and also pursuing the license for the registered dietitian. And I went through the clinical stuff for that, went through the coursework, did the rotations, et cetera. And then when I read the fine print, I realized that the license for this actually limits me more than it helps.
Really?
And so, yes, that turns into a different conversation.
Yeah.
But I realized because of that, I actually just ignored getting the licensure and took the clinical education with me. And after I came back from that part of the world, I settled in Florida. And because with one of the athletes that I worked with for a long time, he owned a facility there that catered to actually the exact same crowd that you cater yourself to, or that you cater, whatever, whoever caters who, we have lots of similarities. Okay,
yes,
thanks. Yes. And so there I got to work with a lot of people in person, very different sort of situation and context outside of the robotic athlete that must get a gold medal or else.
Right.
Very interesting situation, by the way. Lots of fun physiology there. But really, it turned out that I got to have my first, I'm going to get emotional about this. I got to have my first experience working with a child.
Oh, wow.
And even now, very serious medical condition that, I worked with a pediatrician, et cetera. We came with a plan, basically a little while later, the little boy came back into my office 6. He goes, Dr. Kashey, my tummy doesn't hurt anymore.
Wow.
And just
yeah.
I think you as a father, just I think people listening is what else matters in life than that?
Yeah. Taking care of your children.
This child, his pain went away. Even now, wow.
Yeah.
And that really it literally changed the direction of my life. So I worked a lot from working the robotic hyper elite athlete must get gold medal or else types to okay, what actually makes life worth living here?
Right.
And so that introduced me really more to what people call the general population. And I actually really have a strong objection to that term. I take Garrett Hardin's approach that, an expert in one person makes a lay person in all others.
Right.
And so because really general population gets it works as a synonym for dumb people. And that just sucks.
Yeah. So
basically I do this thing, they do that thing. I help people solve problems in that realm. Mostly with nutrition related stuff, because before then, I got spoiled, frankly, by working with the hyper adherent robot types.
Right.
And then when I got to work with humans that have other things in their life going on, because I literally slept in a bed. I lived with them.
Right.
They actually offered me a fancy penthouse and whatever. I'm no, I lived with the soldiers and we shared beds and we ate together so I could watch everything they did. And they live and breathe the sport. Yeah. They have religion up here and then fighting there.
Right there.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and they get sponsored by the government. And so everything that they have got taken care of, and just had a totally different sort of vibe from I want to work with this person that, their kid has boo-boo belly, or I'll just leave it at that. Yeah. For the sake of our conversation, okay.
Well, and there's lots of situations, right? So people that want to lose weight, or that want to get a good, that can go to the beach in the summer and not be embarrassed,
Yes, exactly,
those kind
correct.
of things. Yeah.
Yes, exactly correct. So I ended up learning a ton from people that had serious medical conditions that then transferred over to we'll just for the sake of conversation, call it the general population, everybody else. And there, strictly speaking, adherence turned into an issue where it turned into I had limited communication, they had limited skills, and between us, it made it look like you're a stupid idiot who's resistant to everything I say, because a lot of professionals act that way.
Right.
If you go to a physician, what do they do first? They say, you did a bad thing. Like, thanks. No wonder people hate going to physicians. You get punished every time you go. Like, they give you bad news and then tell you to do something that hurts. I would avoid the office too.
Right.
And so I love having an opportunity to have conversations like this, because physicians in particular, they do want to help. And I think they get upset for the people they work with. And then it comes off very difficult because, like, maybe if I just educate this person, it will help. But like, let's just use the derogatory term. Fat people already know to walk around the block and eat vegetables.
Right.
So telling them 50 times before they leave will just make them hate you.
And we'll just guilt trip them, right?
Exactly correct. Right. And so that guilt trip I label as punishment. And what does punishment cause people to do? Avoid the situations that cause punishment. And then then that actually comes out of your pocketbook as a physician. You have those people come back fewer times.
Right.
Because they know when they come in, you will punish them or guilt trip, right?
Exactly.
So I ended up working with a lot of physicians too, as far as like, what do they call it? Bedside manner or something silly. I just say, like, why do you punish the people that pay you? Like, silly goose.
Yeah.
In any case, it got me much more integrated into the behavior side of things, because I realized that now, like, well, the actual biochemistry of the situation, I understand well enough for the sake of our conversation. And I will tell you that talking about, 3-carbon metabolism for Susie in the car has really done absolutely nothing to help. And even simplifying it to walking around the block and eating vegetables has done absolutely nothing. And so this comes down to, what sort of context do you put yourself in so that it raises the probability of doing the things that help you?
Right.
And so that kind of gives you like the to like how I ended up here.
Doing what you're currently
doing. Why I
doing.
have the sort of philosophy I have around, like, well, what problem do you want to solve, and does it help you live a better life?
Right.
Yes.
So, one point that you brought up that I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about.
Yeah.
You talk about the general population. I think maybe a good way to frame that, because obviously one individual is so unique that it's hard to say this is the general population. But
the statistic, the average man does not exist.
Right. Well, and there are bell curves, but it's like, the one person here has some other difference that makes them totally unique individual.
Literally the average of everything going on. Does that ever happen? No.
Yeah. Now,
except for idiocracy, I guess. But
that being said, there are common ideas, or there are common concerns that do end up happening, right?
Correct.
I think one of the big ones that I wanted to talk to you about was this idea of having a dad bod.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
It's so prevalent in our society at the moment, and like it's to the point where I think in a recent survey that was done to a whole bunch of women, 70% of the women said like they prefer their men to have a dad bod versus like being shredded.
Okay.
What I kind of wanted to hear from you is, if we look at the stats, right, 75% of American men are overweight or obese, and that can come with serious health repercussions. And obviously, we don't want to like batter them to death.
Right.
But like, what in your mind, like, what are some of the health risks? Because I guess maybe this is a good way to frame it. Like, we don't want to like guilt trip people into like trying to like, hey, you need to walk, you need to eat vegetables, because they've already heard that. But like, from what I've seen, being able to show people the negative repercussions of like, if you continue this path, this is a bad thing that's going to happen. And if you go down this other path, these are the good results that are going to happen. So maybe can we dive into that a little bit more?
They know they have a dad bod.
A father figure.
Yes. They know they want to look better. And believe you me, I will put my brick in the wall by saying men want to look better for other men. Men want to look shredded. And men look up to shredded men. Therefore, men want to look shredded.
Right.
And so really, like, I will say it has very little to do with women, because so many other factors besides looks determine whether or not you have a satisfactory relationship. Like so many other things.
Yeah.
And so really this has to do, in my opinion, with other men more than it has to do with women. So this may sound super silly and sexist, but like, do what women think really matter here?
Probably not.
If we have the argument that really men compete with other men and then women come along, even if they compete with each other for women, right? Then it comes down to, how do men determine, not how women determine. And so this issue has nothing to do with women, in my opinion, and everything to do with how men judge each other.
Yeah. And how they judge themselves. Right?
Exactly.
When
Difference.
you look in the mirror, you're
exactly
like, man, you fat slob, you need to go to the gym, right? And
so,
you're guilt tripping yourself.
Right. So if this 205-pound potato walks up next to the 225-pound Greek statue. Yeah, but women. No, you shrivel, dude. You shrivel. You absolutely shrivel.
Right.
I've seen it every day.
So speaking to that,
yes.
People that come to you that have a dad bod, right? They're in decent shape, and they're like, man, I want to get to this point where I can look at myself in the mirror and be like, yeah, this is where I want to be. How would you take care of or help a person like that?
Okay, excellent question. I again try to start every conversation as humanly possible with what problem do you want to solve, and so they come presenting with a problem. And I still like to ask it again, because like you even hinted at it, like, does this really have to do with the dad bod, or does it have to do with I hate looking at myself?
Right.
And so that ends up really making a difference with the sort of intervention.
Well, and another factor is like maybe they look at the mirror and they don't hate themselves, but they know that the long-term health repercussions are going to be this and this and this to not be conducive with where they want to go.
I would say from a success standpoint, that person stays successful for longer.
Right.
I would say that they take longer to reach the result that they want. They keep it for longer, though. And this has to do with the sort of perfectionistic behaviors that the people have when they look in the mirror and they hate themselves, that they must change it right now or else.
Right. And that can lead to body dysmorphia and all these other kind of things. All sorts of
interesting stuff, correct. And then you end up getting to this interesting, restriction, binge sort of situation where like you make one mistake and then you see like, well, let's say you do get abs. Well, then an ab goes away and then you punish yourself. And how do you punish yourself? By doing all sorts of silly stuff. A lot of it involves eating and drinking. And so then you regress even more and then you look worse and then you spiral back. And so to that point, I would say like, do what I consider you behaviorally healthy enough to even get to the situation you want to go to. Because if you, like we discussed a little bit, if you operate out of fear, if you wake up in the morning and basically say, I want to avoid bad stuff, you'll find bad stuff everywhere. Everywhere you look, you will find a bad thing to avoid. And what does that mean? You end up hiding in the corner doing nothing.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea of the dad bod and hating yourself and looking in the mirror, et cetera, like I'll just call it the intentions, like where do you get the reward from? If you feel okay with yourself, well, then that puts you in a better position to like, I can make myself better. And that dives into the difference that maybe we talked about a little bit already of like solving a problem versus reaching a goal.
Right.
And I consider that a semantic difference. And if you do too great, I use it as a framing sort of coaching technique.
I actually read that blog post before I came into this. And so I really like that approach. For the audience that haven't read it yet, can you kind of dive into the difference between setting goals and solving problems?
Yeah. So I will tell you that they look the same. Okay, whatever. I would say that from a behavior standpoint, I look at it in the context of like positive and negative reinforcement. The end result might look the same, although what happens on the inside differs a lot.
Well, and one of the things I would actually argue as well is, and this goes back to like how we are wired as people, is our dopamine system is very much like if you set a goal for yourself of like, this is the destination of where you're going, you arrive at that goal and your dopamine crashes. Right. It's just like flat lines. And then at that point, you have to find yourself another goal and you have to like you have to like almost start from zero and climb yourself back up again.
Yes. And at the same time, putting some common sense to that, I would say, if you have motivation to do a thing and you do it, why would you stay motivated to do it?
Right.
I got to this place. Why would I stay motivated? Like I've already gotten here. How do I get to here again?
Yeah.
And so I would say just from a common sense standpoint, I would say the programming to, well, you did the thing. I will now retract the instructions to do the thing. That makes a lot of sense. And it happens in mice just as much as it happens in men.
Right.
If you set a goal for a mouse, if the mouse has a mouse conversation with itself and it does a thing, well, it actually, that behavior slows down depending on how you end up rewarding the behavior. So the curve, the speed of the behavior ends up making like a scalloped sort of thing, which in humans, it looks like, man, I did a big thing. Now I'll take a break.
Right.
But mice do it too. So that actually exists as like a lawful sort of behavior. I find that interesting because we like to talk about humans acting so fancy, but like the mouse does it too. So does the mouse set a goal?
Or does the mouse just want the cheese at the end of the maze?
Or does it want anything? Right. And so it asks an interesting question of the nature of why we do things, because it makes it, since we have language, It makes it easy to put intentionality into things.
Yeah.
Like, because you set a goal, now this happened. But it also happens in mice. So does that mean mice set goals? And if not, well, it makes more sense from an evolutionary standpoint for us to operate closer to them.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Biologically, yeah. And
Yes,
obviously we've got a cortex, and so we can like do a lot of prefrontal lobe things that mice can't do.
And so, well, that's the same question again. If you subtract language, does this still happen? Yes.
Yeah.
And can you set goals minus language? I would argue not.
So that's kind of a good question. Like, can you draw a picture of a mammoth and your hunting squad going and killing the mammoth for food? Does that constitute a goal? Does that constitute language?
Exactly. And so this, like, before we get too far into the philosophy,
now we're getting into the weeds.
Yeah. So I will finish with this, that I think people often confuse the rules of culture and the laws of nature. And so because we can explain it with language, that makes it look like language caused it.
Yeah.
And so I'll leave it there, but I love to look at animal models for analogous behaviors because that makes the intervention of the behavior to help change it more applicable.
Yeah.
Because mice operate in simpler systems than we do. But if in this situation we act like a mouse, well, then let's start there first. So otherwise you get into this weird philosophy talking stuff and it gets way overcomplicated and then nobody gets anywhere. So again, we got a little bit into the weeds, but basically, like, do you do this because you want to get away from a bad thing, or do you do this because you want to go towards a good thing?
Yeah.
And the solving a problem operates with the person who primarily lives to get away from bad stuff. They have problems they want to solve. Okay. Yeah. Now, in that sort of context, I operate with the theory of constraint. Like, let's look at the lowest hanging fruit here and see what limits you from doing the thing you want to do. Or more, in a lot of instances, we get into this circular sort of, because of our amazing way with language, we give ourselves instructions to do silly things. How do you structure your own language and tell yourself to do silly stuff? And a lot of times, so I call it like you put the car in park and you rev you hit the brake and you hit the gas at the same time. And a lot of people in the situation kind of operate that way, like they rev the engine.
Right.
And you can also call that anxiety. Yeah. Okay. And so now the problem solving approach, I aim to help a person take their foot off the brake. So the person with the dad bod that hates himself, like if that person can feel okay looking in the mirror, like legit, well, now they can set a goal to make themselves better.
Right. They can get their foot off the brake.
Because we've taken them out of the frame of like, I have to not hate myself versus, okay, I can do better. Let's do better.
Yeah.
And that frame allows them to appreciate the sort of progress they make, and then and helps them retain the sort of progress they make with any sort of intervention, whether nutraceutical, pharmaceutical, behavioral, nutritional, whatever
it be.
Yeah. Yeah. And because, like, as soon as they start to regress in some way, that perfectionistic behavior starts to come back and we relapse and et cetera. So the idea that, like, I will get punished if I do the wrong thing, well, we punish ourselves.
Yeah. Well, although, I'm thinking to a certain degree, we do punish ourselves, and it's almost like if we're looking at the analogy of like the mouse.
Sure.
The mouse wants the cheese at the end of the tunnel, but what the mouse doesn't know is that it's an artificial environment. Scientists have set up with little trap doors and shockers and all these things that are going on to extend that analogy to us. We live in a society where, like the food that you can go buy at the grocery store, which arguably is a food, is it a food substitute, right? Is like loaded with high fructose. I look at
molecules, man, all the same to me.
Yeah, well, true. But you've got things like just like things that are so full of all these chemicals and high fructose corn syrup and all these things, all the being so processed and so so hyper palatable that like it seems like we could be trying our very best, and if you don't have the resources or don't have the knowledge, you could be just like running on a treadmill and not going anywhere at all.
Yes, you make an absolutely fantastic point, to which I reply with skills matter.
Yeah.
Yes, and you also make another amazing point that, like, well, you can put the mouse in a Skinner box and control the environment however you want. What also turns out, you can make your own Skinner box. You sit in a room with padded walls with electrical wires everywhere talking to this weird guy through a box. You have modified your environment so that it makes this thing you want easier to do.
Right.
And so speaking with people to understand that frame, I mean, you guys spent like 15 minutes farting around to get things perfect.
Yeah.
And so if you can do it for that, then you can also do it for this. And so I say that less as a jab and more as like, you already have the capacity to do the things you want to do when you want to do them. It just comes down to having a strategy to modify your environment to raise the probability you get the result you want.
Exactly.
And that also in and of itself takes skills.
So one thing that and I've talked about this on the podcast before, and I'd be interested to hear your opinion about this, is for me, the way that I kind of modify my environment is through intermittent fasting. Right?
Okay.
For me, it's a lot easier to say, I'm not going to eat, except for when I'm at home. I'm not going to eat at work. And that prevents me from like snacking on things I shouldn't snack on.
Sure.
That allows me to then be able to spend the money that I would have spent on breakfast and lunch and allocate all those resources into very high quality ingredients and nutrients when I get home to eat. And so like, are there any, I'm not sure if you want to comment on intermittent fasting at all, but like, are there any other modalities or tools like that, behavioral tools that you've seen have really helped a lot of people change their environment to the point where like they can make an effective change in their own life?
So you make an excellent, I like the rule that you created for yourself that you only eat in this place.
Yeah.
And so we could use a fancy term for that called stimulus discrimination. It means that this something in your house when you walk in combined with the time of day raises the probability you do food eating stuff.
Right.
And if you do that enough times, then each time it raises the probability you do it again because food rewards the thing that happens just before it, right?
Exactly.
So this sort of situation, I start like ground zero. I actually have a person keep track of what they already do. And that does a couple of different things. One, it makes a person aware of what they do. Two, it gets me data.
Right.
And three, we can take advantage of observer and or Hawthorne effects. In other words, like I think the strongest behavioral tool for the person with limited skills comes down to what did you do today? And then keeping track and going, whoa, I did a dumb thing. Maybe I could do a smart thing next time.
Don't we all?
Well, you only know, I mean, people have a general idea. They have a general idea, like I can do better, right? And I said that in a mocking tone, but I really like people know. Right. And I get irritated for them, you know? And so by really like putting pen to paper, what did I do? And when did I do it? Where did I do it? And when you have those things, then you could go, oh, I could change the before, I could change the during, and I can change the after. I can modify the environment to raise the probability. So for a lot of people, I say, what do you do right now? And frankly, for most people, they do just fine. Things get out of whack when their normal environment changes. So now you probably do fine day to day, but maybe you operate different if you travel.
Yeah.
Right.
Because of the variables change. Yeah.
Correctamundo. And so now I know that you have the skill to eat in a specific time in a specific place. But if you change the context, do the stimuli generalize? And most times, no. Right. And so people do just fine day to day, but then they go to a friend's house. Then they have the holidays. And they have all these other things happen that interrupt. So I would say, by and large, people do a fantastic job food-wise of regulating their own behavior on a day-to-day basis. Because of the way our culture operates, I would say arbitrarily, once every 10 days, something changes the environment.
Someone brings lunch
to
work. Yeah.
Right. And so when you look at a graph, it shows like, look, you eat 50 calories a day extra on that. Like, no, you have like one big bloop once in a while where it sticks.
Right.
And multiply that about 500 times. And now you look like Michelin Man. You get your dad bod.
Yeah.
And so understanding that on a day-to-day basis, you probably do okay. Things get weird when the environment changes. And so keeping track of what you do on a day-to-day basis shows you like, okay, I regulate myself okay in these conditions. When these conditions occur, I do different stuff that hurts me.
Yeah.
And showing that discrepancy helps.
How do you help people or coach people like be able to anticipate those and like create contingency plans?
Oh, actually and I like the term contingency plan. My favorite way, my absolute favorite way, like I'll just go back to like the scientist in a box. Like people say it in sort of a derogatory way, like the mouse in the box, but like we all sit in boxes. We sleep in a box. We get in a box with wheels. We go into a box with wings. We get like get over yourself, man.
We look into boxes of light and talk to other people in other boxes. Yeah, exactly.
All of them engineered to get us to do things.
Yeah.
And so how about instead of doing things in somebody else's box that they engineered to make you do stuff, you engineer your own dang box. So in this context, we look at, well, we know in this situation things act goofy, so let's create the situation on purpose. Now, having artificial environments, the box, so that you can practice raises the probability you do the right thing at the right time. I love to give the example of little kids in fire drills. Now, if you ring you wait a few minutes, all the little kids run outside and stand in line. Now, if an actual fire happens and the fire alarm goes off, and you turn on the fire alarm, you raise the probability the little kids go walking outside. And so the idea of practicing these things to a lot of people sounds silly, but anybody who has ever gotten good at anything has turned it into a skill and figured out a way to structure an artificial environment to practice and get feedback.
Right.
Like anybody good at anything. Surgeons, you think they just I don't need practice. Let me get right in there and drill. No, they literally spend years of supervision, fake stuff, real stuff, animals.
Getting things signed off on. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly correct. Pilots, military, they all have extreme levels of artificial environments so that they can do the right thing in the real world. And those people do good at the things they do. So I take the position, if you want to do good at a thing, you structure an environment so that you can get feedback on what you do in a regular, quick, and useful way, so that when the situation presents itself, you can do the right thing at the right time. And so this might mean maybe you have issues eating out at restaurants. Maybe that means instead of going with a bunch of friends, you go to that same restaurant with me, knowing that you have issues at restaurants. And now we can have a conversation like this. You can regulate your behavior because we both know what happens and we do it on purpose. You get a win. If you've subscribed to Al Bandura, you've built self-efficacy. You've got evidence you can do the right thing.
Right.
It's a good thing. And do that enough times. Maybe next time we bring another person and then we do approximations. Now you can make it as complicated as you want, but really it comes down to, if I respect that I can regulate myself in my own bubble and I act weird outside my bubble, what about my outside bubble causes me to act weird? And how do I bring some of that in my bubble?
And expand your influence.
Exactly correct. Also known as learning stuff.
Yep. You mentioned that you worked with very high level athletes. How have you seen these high level athletes that competed at the Olympic levels? How do they implement these types of protocols?
They live the protocol.
Yeah. They're robots, right?
Exactly correct. They kind of, in the environment, they have a command line prompt, like an old DOS computer with a cursor, input command.
Right.
Okay. Some of them anyway.
So I guess maybe a better question is then, how can we take some of what they do and translate it to the general public, or to something that's a little bit more easily adhered to for
yes.
For that
and so
audience.
that kind of happens on a case-by-case basis, but I still start with let's take a week or so and just keep track of what you do. And you'll see I do well here, I get weird there, and then we can home in on those areas you do weird and see, well, let's do those things on purpose with a specific sort of objective in mind, and know that we can tone it down and get some success. So I think if I gave a bad example, tell me, but I would say the restaurant situation, I think presents a good sort of example.
Yeah.
If I overdo it at restaurants, especially with friends, I might go to a restaurant on purpose with a supportive friend that helps me regulate what I eat in a restaurant.
And coaches you and really says,
exactly correct.
Let's think about what you just ordered there.
Right.
You ordered the nachos with the extra nacho cheese. Let's think about what that does to your arteries.
And understanding that you have an artificial environment that raises the probability, again, each time you consider a learning point, that you stick in the right area versus I have a plan. I'll go in and I'll use my willpower, whatever people say.
Yeah.
To do the right, but really, I consider things skills. I learned to do this. You learned to eat this way with other people. You learn to eat this way when you travel. And if you learned one way, then you can learn another.
Right. And then at that point, it's just about repetition.
Exactly correct. Yeah. Now you may have learned on accident.
Right.
And I just argue, okay, we can learn on purpose. And so I think looking at this from in the context of skills, you have skills at home. Do you have skills in a foreign country? Probably not. You would learn the language. So I see that as a similar, I learn to eat here, so I can also learn to eat there. I can learn to exercise here, I learn to exercise there. And that just comes from generalizing, like figuring out what in your home environment raises the probability you exercise. And for that reason, I like things like dietary supplements. You can create a chain that sort of gives you momentum. For instance, you've probably heard of like pre-workouts.
Right.
Okay. Now, pre-workouts have stimulants and all sorts of other crazy stuff in them, but let's just take the idea of a pre-workout minus the ingredients for a second.
Mm-hmm.
If you take a pre-workout, it raises the probability you will exercise.
Right.
And from that alone, pre-workout's good.
Right.
Even if you just fill the whole thing with
whatever,
packing peanuts or whatever, okay? Because you have this as a sort of like discriminating like a stimulus to exercise, then it helps you.
Right.
Therefore, integrating the supplement into your day, I would consider immensely beneficial, whether it has a pharmaceutical effect or not.
So it's funny that you bring that up because there's something else that I do personally where, so I have 2 kids and they wake up very early. They're usually up by 6 o'clock. And my wife doesn't like having to deal with them by herself, right? So what I do is I wake up at about 4 o'clock every morning to go work out. And I don't know if you're an early riser, and I'm sure you've met many people that are early risers. It can be difficult to get up and going. And so I have an alarm on my phone. Then in order to turn it off, I have to take a picture of the barcode on the pre-workout. And so I'm awake at 4 o'clock, like groggy as all hell, right? And I'm looking at this pre-workout. I'm
okay, great.
I guess, of course, the night before I set out my clothes right next to where the pre-workout gets put out. Yes. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, I guess I need to go work out. So I'll drink it and I'm all jittery and I'm like, okay, let's go to the gym and I knock it out. Yeah.
Yes. And I love it. And you bring up the language aspect of this where you give yourself directions. Although if you do that with a mouse, it will still happen.
Right.
And so for that reason, I find it super valuable that what you do, I would consider lawful.
Yeah.
Like you use scientific principles to raise the probability you help yourself. Mm-hmm. And that makes me feel good.
Well, and it takes willpower out of it, right? I don't have to think about it anymore. I just, my phone makes a really loud, annoying noise that if I don't turn it off, it'll wake my wife up and she'll kill me.
Correct. Absolutely correct. Yes.
And then I go put stimulants in my body and I go work my heart and do everything I need to do. Yeah.
Yep. So for me, I actually put my alarm in the other room.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So I have to get up and I put it on the toilet. So like, I basically have to go into the bathroom to pee to get my alarm.
Exactly.
And then that ends up starting the cycle of the day.
Yep.
And so very good.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So proud of you, by the way. Nice.
Thanks.
Like for real though. Like, yeah.
Yeah. I guess I think right now we've kind of delved a little bit out of the commentary of nutrition, and we're kind of talking more about behavioral protocols and and the habits and the building up of those habits. But I guess, can we maybe talk a little bit more about like, how do these bad habits, we kind of talked about the idea of like, if you don't intentionally create your habits, you're going to learn something and you're going to do something.
Very good.
Can we talk about like, how do these bad dietary habits come up in the first place? And what can we do to now like intentionally like think about, I go to McDonald's every day. I need to replace this with X, but like, how do we actually do that?
Okay. So you bring up a very, very good point. I think of Nietzsche. It says something like, if you don't govern yourself, somebody else will.
Yep.
Very sort of similar situation where I will say that I think your question leads to an interesting place about like what causes this. And to some degree, I actually, again, I think I coined the phrase, but if you found it somewhere else, please send me the information. I call it the root cause fallacy.
Okay.
Basically, I think for intelligent people, for sure, that wanting to know the cause of something ends up distracting them from solving the problem. Like, if I know what caused this, then the problem will solve itself, basically.
Yeah.
And really, I maintain that what solves a problem differs from what maintains it. And so for me, really, what solves a problem happened what started a problem happened way long ago. Like, can you do anything about way long ago? Not really.
Right.
Now, something today raised the probability of you going to McDonald's. We can look at that.
Yeah.
And so just to give a frame shift here, like, do I really personally care what caused you to start liking McDonald's? Not really. Does it really help us? I think not. Not on purpose anyway, maybe on accident. Yeah. And so now it might mean, for instance, if we look at this as a chain, you can do something as simple as taking a different route home. And so really on the way driving, you have these cues, right? You've automated this like, okay, golden arches. Why do you think you have these giant golden arches?
Yeah.
Well, if you took a different route, even if a little bit longer before you start substituting, right? If you go a different way, it lowers the probability you do the thing. But that also means that you can reward yourself with wholesome, healthy food when you get home.
Right.
And so now you end up doing a, I'll say a funny word, blockchain. You end up basically you cut the head off, right? Like if you look at this, I also like to make the joke of like, people think they have a binge at night problem, but maybe you have a cabinet opening problem.
Yeah.
So that sort of vibe here that like, if you can modify it just a little bit, go a different route home, and then you can set yourself up for success that way by changing the environment a little bit. Does that something like that follow? That's just like a sort of knee-jerk sort of thing to do.
No, I think that this touches into something that I've read a lot about, where it's kind of like the most powerful habits that you can build are not, they're not like the massive accomplishments. Like if you do one massive accomplishment, it takes up a ton of energy and effort and it doesn't really stick. Whereas if you really just hone in and focus in on the micro habits of like, okay, you don't need to like kill yourself that if you don't complete a full workout, like you don't have to go crazy, but all you have to do is you got to get your gym clothes on and you got to get to the gym. Correct. As long as you walk through that gym, let's say you don't even work out, but as long as you walk through that gym, correct. You are establishing the habit of like, I am here and I am ingraining this habit even deeper. And even
eventually it'll turn into, I may as well do something.
Right, exactly, yeah.
Exactly,
I might as well do something that's actually useful for me. Yeah.
Exactly correct. And you have like 100% hit the nail on the head. And I will say in situations like that, working out with people, doing all these other things really helps. Like from the nutrition side, I agree with the hyperpalatable food. It does mean it tastes better.
No.
You have a higher probability of something that tastes better than you do of something that tastes worse.
So like one big thing that I like personally that I am a huge proponent of is people cooking meals at home, and obviously that's a skill. Like you have to learn how to do that. But I've spent I actually spent a whole year specifically dedicated to learning how to cook meat and steak and barbecue and all that kind of thing. And I spent the last year learning how to make bread. Right, from scratch and doing all that, and so I've got some sourdough starting right now.
I mean, you talk to a biochemist, man.
Yeah, you want to talk about all the little microbiota down there? It's so much fun.
I love it, and just like sourdough from different places tastes different because you have different cooties.
It's awesome. Dude, I feel like we could just like jam out about sourdough for a couple hours.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. I absolutely love it.
All that being said, like there's a lot of controversy about how, hyperpalatability and how the food industry uses things like MSG, monosodium glutamate. And so what I do is for my own kids is I put MSG in my own food. Right, because if you actually look at the studies, there's like no scientific data actually backing up that like MSG is bad for you.
Use glutamate for things.
Oh, for all kinds of things. And so, but my logic behind it is like if my kids love my food, then I know that the food that they're wanting to eat is healthy. And so I'm using those mechanisms that the food industry is essentially weaponizing against us, and I'm defending my kids from whatever, the crap that they want to put into.
I love that you said weaponizing against us, because I put the onus on the consumer. Like if consumers bought, like insofar as like, it looks like they do it to do things to us.
Yeah.
But really like, if nobody bought it, would they make it?
But it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing where it's like would they buy it if the MSG wasn't in it? And it might be no, and then it just goes.
You have to buy it first.
Right.
So I understand what you mean, but basically, like the media has gotten crazy because people watch crazy media.
Right. Yeah.
And so I agree that they feed on each other.
Yeah.
I also think that like if people had a problem with it, would it have succeeded? And so like. I more bring this up because I think fault and intention confuses the intervention.
Yeah.
I should write that down because it rhymes.
You should, yeah.
I just made that up.
Put it on the front page of your website.
Making them bad guys, like, does that really help anything? No, it just makes you hate more people.
True.
And does hating more people help anybody? I would argue not.
I guess, but it's not necessarily about hating, but it's like trying to identify the world as it actually exists. Do you think that there are actually food CEOs that are out there that basically want to monetize someone's addiction to Doritos that are like, these are so good? Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, do I think the person on the factory, do they want to do that?
No. Yeah.
No.
They're just doing their job.
If you take swings at an organization, you take swings at the people feeding their families.
That's true.
Frankly. And so again, we agree. And so we just agree with different words.
Yeah.
And by do I agree that corporate CEOs to get up on big buildings doing corporate CEO things? Absolutely. Do I think the ground level worker doing the work does that stuff? Not really.
Yeah.
Not really. So I would say that maybe you call out the CEO by name.
Oh man, or whoever made the decision to put MSG in food.
How many farmers exist because Coca-Cola supports them?
Yeah.
So from a public health standpoint, very much from a private health standpoint, by the way,
very different.
That I agree that from a private health standpoint, gnarly.
Yeah.
Bad. Whatever, negative term you want to use. From a public health standpoint, and that's a different question. Because if we look at dietary recommendations for the individual person, that gets easy. And then I ask the question, can you multiply that by 10 billion? If not, then why even bother making the recommendation?
Right. Yeah,
and that's the discussion.
Yeah, to try and average out. This goes back to our whole bell curve thing of the general public. How do you make good recommendations?
Well, and frankly, the government has done an okay job. People just hate the government because government.
Right. Yeah.
Frankly.
Yeah.
But
exactly.
really, I read the research that they provided to create the guidelines. And so it does an okay job given the circumstances. And when you look at it in context, everybody should eat, the dried up kale and the beet and all that. I think that stuff would kill it. The opposite of kill it, make it live.
Right, exactly.
Multiply it by 500 million.
Yeah.
Does it fly? If not, then I think it would help if we had another conversation about recommendations, right?
Definitely.
Well, I tried to take both sides here. We're okay, if you got $5,000 a month to spend on crazy food and blood tests and all this other stuff, we can go ham.
Right.
Hard as the MFers. We do whatever you want. I also care about this person who how do I work with a person that has to survive on SNAP?
Yeah.
Interesting and different conversation.
Definitely.
And so if I can help a person that survives on government cheese, literally, and they can have amazing results, well, then it behooves me to that makes sense because I think that would scale on a relative basis.
Right.
Versus telling this person they have to get the organic kale, the grass-fed steak, all these interesting things that I do think have their own benefits. That sets that person up to lose. Right. And we have more of those people, my friend.
Yeah, we do. There's a good handful. Yeah, exactly.
Correct. Yeah.
So a question that kind of connects to this, I think, and I'd be curious because I saw it on your site and I was curious to hear what your thoughts are more on and expound on it. You talk about cognitive nutrition. What is that and how exactly does it work?
So excellent question. So obviously, I have this behavioral ilk. Mm-hmm. Okay. I have this ilk of behavior because the skills that I learned in the laboratory, good luck translating them to everyday life. Okay. And I have to scratch my science itch somehow. So this allows me to do sciencey things, although I digress a little bit, but really the cognitive part of things has to do with the fact that a lot of my coaching, a lot of the things I do, a lot of the things coaches do, the work that they do only works if they do it outside of the office. Mm. Okay. So really the cognitive side of things, you can make it synonymous with verbal. And so cognitive really means what do you think? What do you believe? And so I think that we talk to ourselves and that we tell ourselves to do things. Well, I may as well work out. You even said it.
Right.
Right. You might have done it covertly, but you literally told yourself to do a thing.
Yeah.
And you did it.
Right.
And so I take the position that you might call it cognitive restructuring, what other sort of, fancy sort of term you want to use. It basically means people give themselves directions to do things, either implicit or explicit. And if you bring the instructions that you give yourself out into the open and look at them and go, did I give myself good instructions there? Maybe yes, maybe no. And so the cognitive nutrition aspects of things really has to do with less with what you eat and more with how you eat it.
Yeah.
And why you eat it.
Yeah, definitely. So there's this is something that Andrew Huberman on the Huberman Lab podcast talked about with one of his guests. I forget her name, and I feel bad about that. But essentially, the concept that got brought up is like point of view, or like the paradigm that you have with food. If you view food as like this healthy thing that you need to eat because it's good for you, and it's kind of like, yeah, whatever, the adherence to actually eating that goes down. Whereas if you view it as like, let's say that, beans are generally fairly healthy and good for your gut and a lot of different things. If you view like eating a really good homemade hummus as like this luxurious experience, as something that's like, ooh, I get to eat this. This is so great. Yeah. And if you're able to essentially convince yourself and get yourself in that right mindset, then all of a sudden you are looking forward to and really reframing like, I want to do this. Like, I'm excited to go and eat my vegetables. And so then all of a sudden it doesn't become the doctor shaming you to say like, eat your damn vegetables. It's more of like, I want to eat these vegetables because, man, like when I cook them this way, it just tastes so good, and I want to really get more of that.
A legitimate skill, and also a sort of chicken egg issue, because people who do regulate their eating behaviors well operate that way.
Right.
And so then it raises the question of like, what raises the probability you do that? Because frankly, a lot of people would just end up lying to themselves, and that causes its own set of issues.
Yeah.
And so you said the term convince yourself. Well, technically speaking, does that happen? I think it creates an ironic process. True. Where you lie to yourself, and then you ask, did I lie to myself? And you say yes. And then you
go. And so like, that's where like skill learning of like learning how to cook.
Right.
That's where that really becomes massive.
And so now you extract reward in different ways, like the cooking skill. Like maybe you make it and give it to someone and they love it.
Right.
Like maybe you wait until I'll put it this way. If you ask yourself, what do I want to eat for lunch? You can wait.
Yeah.
Period. And I think if like from an interesting sort of behavior, like really nutrition standpoint in general, if like a microwaved, dry, bland potato sounds good, it will taste good.
Right.
And that just might mean waiting a little bit longer than you normally do. And so that brings up the question of like, do I eat because I have a bored mouth?
I think there's a word for that in Japanese. Yeah. What's it called? You remember what it's called? It's like
no, my wife knows it.
Yeah, I love that.
I have a bored mouth, but like I use that too.
There's one in German as well. It's called Kummerspeck, which just means like sad bacon.
Okay,
so it's bacon that you eat when you're sad.
Yes. Okay. So really, that comes down to like, what sort of deprivation do I have?
Yeah.
So if we look at this as a satiation deprivation sort of thing from a nutrition standpoint, it also applies to other things too, physiologically. You might just have a stimulation issue versus a stimulation deficiency, so to speak, versus a food deficiency.
So I kind of wanted to dive a little bit into the biochemistry of this.
Sure,
so it could be essentially, it's not necessarily ghrelin or leptin. It might be a dopamine thing.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
Correct. Yes. And it gets trained either way. Like they have connections between each other.
Yeah.
Because of like the gustatory physiology, like you can look at food and then that stuff starts to happen.
Yeah.
And so that comes down to, so thank you for bringing you back to the biochemistry. It happens because like, let's say your ghrelin does go up. What do?
Right.
Do you change your ghrelin? Do you cut the person's head open and change? No. What do? You do something different.
Yeah.
And so to that point, like if you've engineered the environment so that these hormonal responses occur, which you can, and my favorite example of this, maybe I even said it already. If I hold up a head of broccoli, have I done this yet?
No, not yet.
My favorite. If I hold up a head of broccoli and punch you in the face a bunch of times, what happens when you go to the supermarket and look at broccoli the next day?
It would get PTSD. I'm like,
right.
Trevor Kashey, man, he beat me up, man. He was holy broccoli.
But you have glucocorticoids coming out.
Yeah.
You have cortisol coming out. You have epinephrine coming out. You have all sorts of interesting things occurring. Now, what does broccoli have to do with that? Absolutely nothing until you pair the two things together.
Until you go all Pavlov on me.
And so exactly correct. Right. And so that happens though, whether we want it to or not. And so you can manipulate those sorts of conditions to train yourself away to do something else.
And so you can also do that in a positive context.
Absolutely correct. You can. Just like when somebody says, I love you, you feel fuzzy.
Right.
Same thing. Or like
you might have just gotten a little bit fuzzy there.
Maybe so. It's transferred whether you want it to or not, right? My favorite thing about it.
Yeah.
And so like with your kids, to your point, you put MSG in your food, they might go out 30 years from now and have something with MSG and go, this reminds me of dad.
Yeah.
You laugh, but like you've probably experienced something similar, maybe different things for you, but like that will happen.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so to that end, basically I've just learned to appreciate more and more the environment physiology interaction. And so I respect the biochemistry, obviously.
Yeah.
And I want to change the biochemistry. And so that leaves us with two options. It leaves us with, we take drugs or we change the environment.
Yeah.
And with the day-to-day person, you have like, unless you cut their head open or inject them with the drug, they change their physiology by doing something else different around them.
Right. Well,
now, like the other stuff, I do agree. It just comes down to like talking to that person. Like, if you can change your physiology with drugs and it would help you here, like, yeah,
exactly.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
And I feel totally cool with that. Again, I just default there because I end up doing the so-called combination therapy anyway.
Right. Well, so we've talked about this on the podcast multiple times where like we believe in the 5 pillars of health, which is essentially like get good sleep, get good exercise, have a good diet, interact with other people in a good way. And then like if for some reason you're suffering and you're not getting what you need from those 4, then you may need to rely on like supplementation or pharmacology, right? Yeah. So for example, one of the examples that we use is like as you get older, it can be very difficult to get B12, vitamin B12 from your food because your stomach literally stops producing the chemical that's needed to digest it. And so, in that situation, as you get older into your 50s, 60s, you become vitamin B12 deficient. And at that point, you may need a vitamin B12 injection or a supplement of some sort to be able to get to a baseline level that helps you feel good and feel at the point where you want to be at. Absolutely correct.
And again, like some people get weird about, now get everything from food. Yeah. Well, let's say that maybe they would eat too many calories.
For instance, or would eat entirely too many heads of broccoli.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly correct. Yes, and cause a whole host of other issues.
Yeah.
And then again, with the populations that get above 50, like they produce less saliva. They feel hungry less often. They have other things going on that change the way they interact with food, which then also lends them to higher palatability foods because to get enough nutrition for the amount of hunger they have, you end up going towards density.
Yeah.
And so if you can sort of bridge the gap, that also helps hunger a lot too, because we can have really selective hunger. Kind of like if you have a deficiency in something, you might eat more food in general,
right,
so that you can replete that thing. And so finding those sorts of deficiencies, like again, the silver bullet situation.
Yeah.
If you have like a single thing going on and you have like, if you have a key to the slot, well then by golly, like that makes too much sense.
In that slot. Yeah.
Dude, like, come on.
Yeah.
Make your life so much simpler. And that frees you up to use your time for more interesting things than sitting around eating heads of broccoli.
And thinking about how to cook it, how to get yourself, how to get that volume of broccoli into your stomach. Yeah, is not a good use of time.
I feel the pain. And again, the silver bullet situation, I find that stuff most effective.
Yeah, definitely.
The general quality of life stuff then absolutely goes into the combination of like, you feel bad for more reasons than this. Although this will make you feel better, it'll actually protract how long you let this make you feel bad.
Yeah, definitely. So something I kind of wanted to talk about, and we talked about this a little bit before we actually started the show, but essentially I kind of wanted to talk more about, like, let's say someone now has this dad bod and they want to get to a point, but they're trying to determine what point do they want to go to. There's a couple of different avenues, and I'm sure there's actually multitudinous paths that people can go down. But like being able to just like 3 common ones are, I want to look shredded, right?
Okay.
Which is a lot of shredded people on your website showing
Yeah.
off their 6-week abs, which is great.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah.
And then you have people that just basically want to be stronger or more
Mhm.
functional. And then you have other people that want to work out for longevity.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about each one of those individually and kind of different approaches that you would take with someone that wants to go down each one of those different kind of pathways?
Absolutely. So I will tell you that the shreddedness actually has very little to do with how you exercise and everything to do with nutrition.
Yeah.
The question then turns into how much muscle mass do you want to have when your body fat gets that low?
Yeah.
And so that asks two interesting questions that end up taking, like, again, a combination sort of approach. And so what I have found a vast majority of the time, the people with the daddiest of dad bods, they want to get super shredded, although they realize at about 7% total body weight loss, at that point, they start to get an idea of, okay, I actually want to get here.
Yeah.
Because really, if you have 0 point of reference, you just go to like, okay, what does everybody else want?
Yeah.
And so I entertain it. Like, all right, let's get shredded. Okay. And then what do? I check in. Do you still want this? Do you still want this? Do you still want this?
Well, and at a certain point, people like you hear all the time that like people that are on the cover of magazines and that are competing in these competitions and are at that low of body fat levels, they feel like crap. Right?
Yeah. And
you just don't feel good.
They call it an off season for a reason.
Yeah.
Like nobody really hides that.
Yeah.
And so I also find that interesting and fun that, like, have you ever talked to one of those people? Maybe that would give you an idea.
Yeah.
And so to that end, like, they have off seasons. I get fatter during this time on purpose.
Yeah.
And so the shredded aspect of things, I go by basically 7 to 10% drops in body weight per 6-month period.
Okay.
And so we go 6, and I do that for clinical reasons because it just, I prefer that. Okay, fine. That if it happens faster, okay. But really I aim for 10% of total body weight over 6 months.
Well, and it's more sustainable, right? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I prefer that rate. And then we do a check-in, like, okay, you've lost 10% of your body weight. What do you want to do? And then I just ask that question over and over. And then the leaner they get, the shorter we make those cycles.
Mm.
Then it might go to 3 weeks. Then it might go to 3 months. Then it might go to 6 weeks.
Gotcha.
And so then I start doing, and then I might go to every 2 weeks, like doing check-ins every 2 weeks. Like, you still want to do this? And then at that point, I will have okay, let's do something fun to reward that you did a great job here. And then we can start gaining weight on purpose again, except when you start gaining weight on purpose and you do it the right way, you actually distribute the fat in a more even way.
Gotcha.
Lots of people, when they get super lean and then they lapse and they go crazy on pizza and beer and gain tons of weight back, it goes back in crappy places.
Yeah. Right where everybody doesn't want it. Yeah.
Exactly correct. And I will tell you that if you put the weight back on slowly and on purpose, the fat distributes in a more even way for you.
Yeah.
And so the person actually ends up looking way better when they put fat on purpose in a calculated way.
Yeah.
The fat gets more distributed. And so it actually makes you look far more muscular.
Well, because you look bigger. What I've heard is essentially when you cut, like, you look really good when your shirt's off and when you have the right lighting. But as soon as you put your shirt back on, it's like, man, that guy over there is so skinny.
Exactly.
He's beauty, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly correct.
Yeah.
Yes. If you have limited weight training experience, then you will have limited muscle mass when you get lean.
Exactly.
Yeah, correct. And so you end up actually looking quite bad in clothes, looking impressive with clothes off. And so I tell people to aim for, I call it super medium.
Okay.
Where I have worked with a lot of special forces guys and work with them to maintain their body weight and body fat to maintain their optimal performance. And I just ended up calling it super medium.
Well, and so that kind of brings up a whole different, the different pathway of like people that are training for functionality. So someone with a dad bod that knows they have a dad bod, obviously we've gotten them past the point where they're done hating themselves, but they just want to be healthier.
Yes.
And they want to get down to functionality.
Yes. And so I love the path of, like, again, I asked the question, what problem do you want to solve? But now I put it towards, like, what do you want to do?
Yeah.
A lot of people say, I want to make myself more functional. Well, like, frankly, if you do anything more than open a jar of pickles, you just show off. So like, let's get real here. What do you want to do?
We're in a society. In fact, so it's funny. Me and my brother, we're both very similar. We're into fitness and all those kind of things. I'm very much about functionality, and he's very much about looks. And so every time we meet up, we always kind of have like this kind of small debate between each other. And then we always kind of conclude, it's like, well, I'm glad that's working for you, man. And then we disagree, in a nice way. But the argument he always makes to me that I'm always kind of like struggling, and the point that you bring up is it's like, okay, you're training for functionality. Like, what do you actually do on a day-to-day basis that does that? I'm like, well, I hope my friends move a lot. So that's helpful. But other than that, like on a day-to-day basis, I drive to work, I do my thing, I drive back home, I might have to open up a pickle jar. And, at that point, it's just like keeping up with my kids,
Yes. So to that point, I find, and I like that. So the funny thing turns into like looking better actually has more function. I will argue that on a day-to-day level, looking sexier has more function than not.
Well, and this is another point, because I think we've talked about this before, with my brother, is that the two kind of overlap, right? So like if you are training to look better, by being there, by association, you're gonna be more functional. And if you're training to be more functional, by association, you are gonna look better than you were if you didn't before.
Correct. The difference just turns into how many calories do you eat.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, correct. And if you like to have a heavier body, which has its own benefits, if you enjoy those benefits and know them, well, then I feel all for it. I understand. I weigh a lot. I weigh like 250 pounds. I also know I can pick up a car.
How big are you? How tall are you? Sorry.
6 feet tall.
6 feet tall. So
world's skinniest 250-pound man. Champion.
So I'm 6'2" and I'm 270. So
270. Okay. Yeah. Super heavy.
Yeah.
And so like for me, to you, I would say like, I would consider it a dumb decision if you ran, but slap a backpack on yourself
and go rucking.
And yes, exactly.
I love it.
Yeah. And so there we look at like, again, so for those situations, say like, okay, do you care about flexibility? Do you care about speed? Do you care about strength? Do you care about power? I basically list a different sort of, functions of fitness.
Yeah. And athleticism. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Thank you, by the way. And then go from there to tailor training. And then you can also tailor the nutrition around that training, which helps with adherence, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And so at the level of the keyboard warrior, that sort of detailed nutrition plan, I think, has limited effect on performance on scientific paper basis.
Right.
But really, like, it makes your life better, so let's do this.
Yeah. That reminds me. So it's kind of a clickbaity title. I was scrolling through Facebook and I saw this thing. It's like the scientifically best workout that whatever it is. And I'm like, okay, I'm curious. So I click on it. And of course the answer is the best workout is the one that you will do. And I'm like, get out of here. You guys, are you kidding me? But there's something to it, right? It's like,
I pull that card all the time.
Yeah.
Either that or I just say walking.
Because everyone can walk. Yeah. I mean, I guess I shouldn't say that. Most everybody can walk. The general population can walk.
Yes. If you can walk, then you can walk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean that seriously rather than as a joke.
Yeah. Although it doubles. So
yes. Yeah. Yes. Agreed. So that I care, like, what sort of function do you want? Because on a day-to-day basis, having a better looking body has more to day-to-day, like you get
utility,
get more rewards for that. And so if you want to jump higher, run faster, lift heavier stuff,
walk farther.
Exactly correct. That turns into the function. Okay. Now for the longevity standpoint, that again turns into what problem do you really want to solve? If you just like only care about living as long as possible, I would probably refer you out. Because I care about what do you want to do with your life?
Yeah.
Not how many times can you poop and eat before your heart stops?
Yeah.
Because I just have a philosophical conflict with that.
So there's this book I read that I absolutely love. It's called Being Mortal by a guy named Atul Gawande. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but
no.
But basically the concept of it, the whole book is about like coming to terms that we're all going to die someday.
Yeah.
And I know that's kind of took a turn, but like at the very end, he talked about two different conditions where, there's this life-saving procedure, but the end result is that when you get it, like you're stuck on a couch and all you can do is watch TV and eat chips. And one person might say, yeah, that's all I want out of life for the rest of my life. And as long as I can do that, I'm happy. Whereas you might have someone else who's like a very high level executive and is like saying, if I can't contribute to my community, I don't want to live. And so basically they conscientiously make that choice.
Yes. Yeah. And this can get extreme too, but I guess you have the magic of editing. So I'll let you decide. But this will get extreme, but I have this philosophy that like, let's say I wish 100% of people died by suicide. Okay. Now this sounds strange at first glance. It also means 100% of people choose when they die.
Yeah.
It just sounds strange because only sick people kill themselves. The way that we have the label. But you just asked an interesting question. Can you make the rational decision to live or die?
Yeah.
And so you have a living will where you make a rational decision to live or die. But on the other hand, if you choose to live or die, you have a mental illness.
Right.
And so I find the interesting sort of ethical question here that like, if I had a choice, I would rather everybody chose to go when they wanted to.
Well, it kind of like, let's say that the anti-aging science, it progresses to a point now where people can live to be 200 and they get to that point and they're like, well, the question then is, do you actually want to live for 200 years?
Yes. That you ask so this brings up an interesting point of, I care less about how long you live and how much you age. So people really, if you dig a centimeter under the ground, if it means that like we care less about anti-aging and more about extending life.
Less about longevity and more about anti-aging.
Yes.
Yeah.
Basically, you want to extend your youth span, if we want to go these little spans. How long can you stay 25?
Yeah.
Right? Because, I mean, a 150-year-old person will look like a 150-year-old person.
Yeah.
Like
from their skin and all the different kind of things. Yeah.
Like if aging changes to change the lifespan, well, then I would still maintain the same philosophy and just make a proportional difference. If that by default, if you double lifespan, if it by default doubles workspan, then we would have the same conversation here.
No, we talked about workspan before we started recording, but for people that are listening, can we talk a little bit more about that?
I think most of us have an operational understanding of like you live and you die.
Yeah.
Right. But we call that lifespan. How many beats do you have, breaths do you take, et cetera, before they terminate?
Do you take? Yeah, exactly.
Yes, correct. And then I think most people too have an operational understanding of health span. Basically, how long before you start dying?
Yeah. And
that can take decades, right? So essentially your health at this point has literally started to go downhill, and right? Because you improve in performance and then you maintain performance and your performance starts to go down until it hits zero.
Right.
Now, I propose a third ray, which I would bet exists somewhere else. So please, if somebody knows, please tell me. I call it workspan, which essentially means how long do you stay useful? And to me, that raises an interesting sort of bioethical question, because a person might live to 100, but maybe their usefulness, they stopped doing anything useful and they started waiting to die basically at 60.
Yeah.
Now let's say another person, they die at 85, but they go out, like they kick and scream and cause a ruckus and do useful things till 80.
Yeah.
I would argue that person lived 20 years longer.
Theodore Roosevelt. I don't know how much you know about him. Very rambunctious individual, right? He like did all kinds of stuff. He climbed trees. Yeah. So while he was president, he would like climb a tree, or like someone would walk into the office and he'd like do some jujitsu move on them, and just like insane dude. Yes. So he died in his sleep, and so essentially somebody commented on it and said, well, he had to die in his sleep because if he hadn't have died in his sleep, he would have fought death. While he was awake, he would have like taken him on head on. So anyways, exactly. Yeah.
And so it brings up an interesting conversation with us bioethically with supplements and pharmaceuticals, et cetera, of like, I would argue, like, does it make sense to burn the candle on the other end to extend your workspan?
Yeah. To
stay useful, to have a good life for longer, rather than having more heartbeats.
Yeah.
And I will take a stance that I would argue for a better life for longer than more heartbeats. Because I think we will have sufficient technology to extend heartbeats quite a long time, to protract as much misery as humanly possible.
Right.
if you can stay useful, whatever that means to you, and I mean that, and I mean that seriously, well, then it makes sense to make that last as long as you can.
Definitely. So going back to this book by Atul Gawande, one of the things a study that he brought up was essentially that there's two groups of people that had terminal cancer. And they had two and they were part of study groups. They had two routes that they go down, whether that they do experimental cancer treatments or they decide to go on hospice care.
Yeah.
What's crazy is not only, intuitively, like you think, okay, the people that go the hospice route, they have greater quality of life. But counterintuitively, they actually also have greater, they live longer. Right.
You contribute to the body. So if I had that choice, I would put myself in experimental science all day long because it makes me useful.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But some people might just want to be able to live out the rest of their days with their family and be able to be useful in a different capacity of I'm going to use my last days loving my family and they find great meaning and use out of that. Whereas somebody that's more scientifically inclined is contribute my body to science, and
so for that reason, I consider it an individual thing. And if that person really does get value out of the hospice care, well, then fantastic for them.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think if a person has something to do, they will do it longer than somebody who does not.
Yeah. I keep quoting all these books but it brings stuff up. Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, one of my absolute favorite books. He talks about how there was in December of the war that there was all the people in the concentration camp. Basically, they were saying, I'm just going to make it till Christmas. We're going to get out by Christmas. And then Christmas came and went, and the amount of people that lived, the amount of people that weren't able to hold on after that, dropped off. So just being able to have something to look forward to is this life-sustaining thing that is incredible.
I would argue that you only live if you do things.
Yeah.
Right? If you stop doing things, you die.
Well, your brain literally gets smaller and all these kind of crazy things. Yeah.
I would argue that a dead person does nothing. And so doing something, you will live longer. Yeah. And again, it sounds silly, but I tried the redneck logic sort of conversation we have. One of my favorite parts about that book, by the way, he said something to the effect of, I paraphrase, nobody had insomnia.
Yeah.
I think my favorite part of the book.
Yeah.
No, everybody fell asleep before they hit the pillow. Yeah. And for whatever reason, that really stuck with me, especially with the sort of culture we have now. Again, peeling away the atrocity aspect of this and looking at the environmental conditions, why would all of them fall asleep before they hit the pillow? And so you can make all sorts of interesting arguments, but I found that as the most interesting one because insomnia has such prevalence now. Mm-hmm. And just how else can you extract utility of it? It has so many useful things. And that one I just found so interesting that they all worked all day, for instance.
Yeah.
They exhausted themselves. Obviously all sorts of other things going on, but it just goes to show that physical activity to some extent will contribute to these things.
Yeah. Well, there's this cliche, work poster quote that I am a sucker for good inspirational quotes. It's just I love them.
Man.
But essentially there's this inspirational quote that's you have to work with conviction in order to go to bed with satisfaction, right?
Oh, how fun.
It's when you hit the day hard and you go 100%, when you hit that bed, you're out in just blissful sleep. It's I love that.
Yeah. My dad, the carpenter, would say you earn your shower.
Yeah.
Go to bed empty. Lots of idioms.
Or when you go and work out and you come back home and you eat your post-workout meal, no meal tastes any better than that meal. It's it tastes so good.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And we even call it the post-workout meal, which I love.
Yeah.
So going back to healthy habits, that you have the pre-workout. If you have the pre-workout, it raises the probability you will train.
Yeah.
If you have the post-workout, it also raises the probability you will train.
Right. You create those markers, those landmarks.
You cut out the best meal of the day. Come on.
Yeah. Seriously. Yeah.
Yeah. But really, that helps chain it all together, man. So to kind of bring that back, absolutely correct. It's just another way to how do I use nutrition to my advantage? And I think it in the context of I consider nutrition rewarding. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so if you eat 5 times a day, that means you reward yourself 5 times a day. What do you reward yourself for doing?
Right.
And so that means, to your point of how do we raise the probability of useful stuff happening, maybe your meal timing or your activities around meals change so that you reward yourself for doing something useful.
Yeah.
The post-workout meal is the single best example.
Yeah.
You literally reward yourself for doing something healthy with something healthy. Can
Right.
you get any better?
Not much.
In my opinion, not
much.
really, unless you continue to train, right?
Right.
And so this gives an excellent starting point for that sort of like longevity, right? And that the nutrition aspect of things, that when you have a balanced diet of healthy foods and that reward you, right? Now you have that, to your point, as a weapon.
Right.
You can wield it like a tool.
Yeah.
Now, wherever I place this, whatever I do right before it, I'll probably do it again.
Yeah.
And so now, if you, for instance, time your meals, okay, like the intermittent fasting thing, we can use another interesting modality that I've used before, more with business owners, but still, like, I mean, a bunch of other people too. I just like to give the business owner example.
Yeah.
Like, how can you time your meals around, for instance, the parts of the day where you have work you hate the most?
Yeah.
And that does more than nothing.
Oh, it does that. Yeah.
You know that, like, I know if I get through this meeting, I can eat.
Right.
What do? You get through the meeting.
Yeah.
And so we can make up all of this mumbo jumbo about like all the psychology going on, but really, like, you rewarded yourself for going through the meeting with healthy food. And so you did something that helped your business and your family, and then you rewarded yourself with something healthy for doing it. And then you have your pre-workout, and then you train. And so, like, you can actually chain the events of your entire day so that you could use something like food, something naturally rewarding,
yeah,
as a way to keep prompting all of those other healthy things.
And just continuing to kind of build it in a modular way. Yeah.
Exactly correct. Yeah. And I love that term, module. Yes. I use chain links. So, like, very, very similar sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think this is in one of those books about habits that I read. I can't remember which one it was, but essentially that if you're able to tie in a habit to one that you already have existing, the likelihood that you'll adhere to it increases by a large amount. And so being able to have the pre-workout and then the workout and then the post-workout, like being able to tie things into that is going to set you up for greater success.
Exactly correct. And in layman's terms, we call it a routine.
Yep.
It just, people tend to truncate routines into a small period of time, but you can have a routine for a whole week, for a whole month.
Yeah. Or
for an Olympic athlete, a 4-year routine.
Yeah, true.
Right. So, so excellent point that you bring up there. So what successful things do you already do? And how can you take advantage of those things?
So a couple of final questions that I kind of want to ask you is, first is we're talking about, like, you have to know where you're going and what your overall goal is, right? I kind of want to ask you, I mean, I've really, really enjoyed this conversation and getting to know you and your personality and all these things. And I would love to have you back on the show at some point and have another conversation like this. Absolutely. But for you personally, what is your drive? What is your goal? Like, you know, in towards the end of your life, wherever you end up being, what does that look like for you?
I love to answer that I will go the path of least resistance. But that really means anything.
Right.
And so, I mean, go where the wind blows me, like whatever sort of term. I will tell you that I will maintain a scholarly capacity until I die. Yeah. And so this brings up this concept of loyalty that I've started building out, but basically, like, what things do I do the most depending on the sort of, like, no matter the situation. And so those things I want to keep around as much as I can. Yeah. That if I went to Mars or I went to Kentucky or I went to China, what would I still do over there? And I want to then sort of looking at that, how can I keep doing that? And how can I get better at those things? And so I consider it like having as many skills as I possibly can and getting as skilled at those skills as I possibly can. I actually consider the sort of secret to a good life, so to speak. Right. Basically, I just see it as doing useful stuff rewards you and other people. Yeah. The more ways I can do useful stuff, the better life I will have. Yeah. And so to that end, like, I see myself sitting in the cave, writing, doing, like, if you look at crazy academic dudes, like, they give their last lecture a week before they die. Yeah. Count me in. absolutely count me in. So like the Feynman, last lecture 2 weeks before he died. Albert Ellis, last lecture a week before he died. Like these guys, they stay useful literally until their dying breaths.
Yeah.
And so to your point, I care to stay useful, die in my sleep or fight death.
Yeah.
Like, holy cow, you know, and doing the things that I have gotten good at. So I will tell you that I care that I can get good enough at things to make them useful, whatever that thing. Because maybe I do have a stroke and I lose function and all my biochemistry goes out the window and all the and then like, okay, now I have to get good at something else.
That's another problem and another problem to solve.
Exactly correct.
So
as long as I have that capacity where I can get good at something and I can get good enough to make it useful, I will plug on. Absolutely plug on, man, violently as possible.
That's great. I resonate with that on a very deep level. So that's fantastic.
Cool. Yeah, for real. And I'll do
cool.
whatever it takes. Whatever drug, whatever supplement, whatever crazy, like, you know, I will do it all. I will do it all twice just to make sure I eat it.
There you go, man. So then the last question I have for you is, let's say someone, I guess last piece of advice. So someone that's at the very beginning of all this, that's listening to this and is like, I want to get started, but like, I just don't quite know what next step to take. What is the one piece of advice that you want them to remember that can really help them propel forward?
So I will default back to the Hawthorne effect. Okay. So I talk to everybody and consider them intelligent and educated, every single one. And I get violent about that too. I believe in my bones, you already know what to do. And I already believe in my bones, you know how to do it. That really you do. Maybe to varying degrees, you still know though.
Yeah.
And so by getting aware of yourself, by watching, by observing yourself do things, you will automatically see, like, where do I go next? And so the first step to me goes, where do I stand right now? And as soon as you figure out where you stand, man, the path will build itself. Yeah. I promise. I promise. Because you already know. You know the things. You can do the stuff. I know you can. And I know you can because you made it this far.
Right.
And if you made it to 20, to 30, to 40, to 50, to 60, to 70, you already have everything. Like, how can anybody firmly believe they do something wrong at 60? You made it to 60.
Yeah, man.
You went 60 years. If you did something wrong, you come on.
Yeah.
And so you did things good enough. And I consider things good enough. Could you get better? Probably. We could all get better at things. And so by having an actual understanding of where you stand, what you do, the observer effects, the Hawthorne effect, that you start paying attention to yourself, you will know, like, okay, I absolutely know I could make this better, and I have the tools and skills to make this better already.
Yeah.
And so it turns into a self-perpetuating machine. It just turns the energy gap of like, man, I know if I pay attention to what I do, I know I'll find weird stuff. So having a little bit of support helps, but really, like, the more weird you feel about that, the more resistance you feel about keeping track of what you do, or keeping a log, or measuring, or observing, whatever term you want to use, the more it will help you. Mm. Otherwise, somebody else will.
Right.
And if they know what you do and you don't, they can control what you do.
Yeah.
So it turns into this interesting sort of like, who do I want running my life? And so it goes into lots of different directions there. But basically, I would say step number one, at whatever level you feel comfortable, keep track of what you do. Keep track of what you eat. Keep track of how much you sleep. Keep track of when you yell at somebody or you get yelled at, or whatever you choose to keep track of that thing for a couple of weeks or a week. And you will learn amazing things about yourself, I promise. From little kids to soccer moms to gold medal athletes to presidents, I've only ever gotten net positive feedback from observing yourself in your natural environment.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic advice, man. And I'm sure it's appreciated by everyone that's going to see this.
Sure. I hope so.
So I wanted to thank you again for joining the show. Where can people find you and your work?
So you can find me at trevorkasheynutrition.com. You can find some of my antics on Instagram, TikTok, etc. With @Dr. Kashey. I make short little videos talking about doing more smart stuff and less dumb stuff as often as I can. And if you have any questions, I have a staff of a few dozen people, so you will get a human responding to things. And I only know to answer your question if you ask, and we will take the time with anybody that inquires. So for anybody that comes from here, please make sure you let us know, because then I can give your boy a little tip. I appreciate this very much. I had a wonderful time, and I would love to give your host credit for garnering interest in this sorts of philosophy and way of living.